Okay, so something to think about in terms of widening the scope of your research. Like I said, you can do gender for your identity if you want, but if you were interested in doing something like ethnicity, then have a look at these books here. It might be quite interesting, even to narrow it down even further if you wanted to maybe look at black women in music videos or Muslim women in TV. It's entirely up to you, but there's some other resources that you can look at here. Okay, so moving on, just what I want you to do is have a think about using these terms, okay, in your essays and in your everyday responses to when we look at exam questions and things like that, because it's all going to contribute to you getting those higher marks. So obviously you know media text, okay, so it refers to media material. Discourse is basically just the way of talking about things, okay, so how we actually talk about issues to do with identity, and how those media texts refer to things that are going on in society or the world of that identity at the time. So Gauntlet's used an example here, talk about the discourse of women's magazines, for example. So how do those magazines typically talk about women and men, their social lives, and the kind of roles that they present? Biological determinism is basically kind of like a pessimistic way of looking at how we are as people, okay? So saying that simply because I am a woman and they are a man, that is going to impact how we interact with each other and how we see things just simply because of our biology. So you can feel free to disagree and debate these, okay? This is what the exam will want you to do. They want you to challenge, all right? Social constructionism is completely the opposite. So we're shaped by society and culture. We can adapt, we can change. The whole book sort of explores the media text and how they impact people's identity, and that's kind of the whole thing. Why we're looking at identity specifically, because it's fluid, because it can change, because you can pick and choose. So I guess you need to have a little think about which one of these that you agree with, or could there be arguments for both, and how does the media actually play on those, okay? So for example, advertising is very biological determinist in how they represent the identity of women. Modern life and modernity is just basically talking about how we live in our current modern society, okay? So it's about the development of modern life as opposed to caveman or even the 1920s, 1930s. So it's the present time in our developed countries, okay? Another key bit to think about is looking at the fact that we're not just one mass audience, we're all made up of individuals. So although in year 12 you're talking about audiences, now we're thinking about people as users or participants, okay? So try and avoid the use of a whole term of an audience. It's more now the individuals within our society, so we're users or participants. And think about the individual identities. So we're going deeper now into what makes up the society who uses these media texts. And they also note that, this choice of a way of living, it's not just about something that the middle classes talk about, okay? So we're in a very privileged position at the moment to be discussing these things, because we're not concerned with when's my next meal going to come, where am I going to get money from, I'm being kicked out of my house. Our minds aren't taken up with these kind of issues. So we have time to sit and, think about the bigger things in life and the bigger pictures. But actually what Gauntlet's saying here is that even though some theorists are saying, well, you're lucky you got a roof over your head and you're being fed and you go to school and you got an education, so it's all right for you to talk about this stuff, and actually you don't really understand what it's like to be a human being in the functioning world today. But Gauntlet is saying that actually there's still identity available, and there's still a discussion to be had about identity with people who aren't just in the middle class. So you've got to think about, people as individuals on their own. Right, some background debates. Okay, so I want you to go through this, and I want you to make notes in a table for each section. Okay, so you've got that there to hand, and it introduces you to two theorists. Okay, Theodore Adorno and Fiske. All right, so they're two opposing ones. Now, Adorno says that the media industry is basically like a culture industry, so everything's the same. Each product presents that it's an individual thing, but actually it's just a part of a bigger spider web. Okay, so go back to that spider web idea that we were talking about in year 12. Okay, so these individuals, these users, these participants, are sort of captured in this spider web, and they think that they've got control, but actually they don't. So that's the premise that Adorno works off, and he highlights an example here. So characters in the industry who are represented as quite adverse and challenging, so he says Marilyn Manson and Eminem, actually he's saying they're not really rebels, they're not really individual, they're just another option in a big capitalist society, where users are sort of caught up and they're using this, and they think that they're being individual, and they think that they're putting two fingers up to the institution, but actually they've just bought another product from the music industry. So think about, even though we talk about things as being alternative and different and challenging, how from Adorno's point of view, is it really challenging, or is it just buying into the same stuff that's being generated by media institutions? An example might be to think about like Channel 4. So they have quite a lot of subversive and sort of challenging shows. But Adorno would argue that actually, well, they're just offering an alternative, and the consumers are still consumed by it, and they still buy into it, and they still buy the product. So really, it's not that individual. And he goes on there to summarise that. So he's saying that you'll conform one way or another. It doesn't matter what you conform to, and that's replaced your ability to think as a rational human being. These bits in blue, there'll be a note about a key text that will be good to look at if you're interested in developing this further for your case study. So here he's arguing that this culture industry, it stops us deciding consciously for ourselves, and it picks out American Idol and the X Factor to this. So the reason why they're so popular is that they explicitly show the process of market-driven selection and the process. So people get involved in the journey of these singers. Okay, they become emotionally invested in them, and because they think that they're seeing this process, including the auditions, which are pre-selected by producers anyway before they even get to that queue outside of the studio, they are already seen through pre-audition stages. So everything that's been chosen on X Factor or Pop Idol has already been seen before. So it's a complete construct. I think we talked about this last year, and especially the songs that were released by the winners. So Kelly Clarkson's single "A Moment Like This" on the US Pop Idol went to #1 on the Billboard chart and broke the record set by the Beatles. It'd been specifically written as the first song, and then Leona Lewis did exactly the same thing on X Factor. She rehashed Kelly Clarkson's song, so it's all just repeated formats, and it's all repeated text, and there's nothing really individual, according to Adorno. And he talks about what's called a false consciousness. So basically that's like having the wall pulled over your eyes, and you think you're living in a world that is real, but actually it's not. And you might not think that mass media has damaged you, but Adorno is saying that you wouldn't notice anyway if you're being hoodwinked essentially into this kind of popular culture. So his opposition is John Fiske, okay, and he basically says that we can't really talk about the people or an audience because a single group of consumers doesn't exist. I know we've spoken about audiences, and media industries do use audience segmentation to target their products at. They do that, and they do a lot of market research into it. But, you know, if you're presenting a product, it would take a lot of time and effort and money to try and reach every individual's needs and wants and gratifications. So obviously they have to segment into broad audiences. But what he's saying is basically the culture that we have, it's can be developed, and we actually have power to do that. If we don't like a product, then we're not going to buy it. We're going to vote with our feet. So actually, media institutions have to listen. So this is where you bring in the triangle, okay? The media, the text, and the audience. So always be thinking about that. Always be thinking about those relationships and how they're impacted by, you know, the audience themselves. Now we're talking about the audience having power. We've also got a bit of Stuart Hall here, okay? So this builds on what we've looked at already, but just make sure you've got those notes, okay? But this goes a bit further and talks about a process called interpolation. So basically it's like being sucked into the web and not being able to get out, okay? So we engage with these media texts and we recognise their structures and we go, well, okay, well, I'll join in. I'll join in with this, okay? And if you do that, it's basically saying that we accept what the media institution are presenting to us, okay? And if we're not critical about it, it means that it's interpolated us. So think about, you know, the aliens sucking you up into their spaceship. All right, that's it. You've been caught, and you haven't got any power to change that. And he's talking about specifically about dominant ideologies in society. Okay, so that can be to do with, you know, female identity. Buy the products for your face. Go and buy MAC. Go and buy Rimmel. Go and get the face wash. You know, have to do your nails. Have to go to the gym. They're kind of things that we just accept that we have to do, particularly as a woman. And that means that these media texts have interpolated us. And we've been sucked into the web and we can't get out. Now this bit, don't worry about making notes on it, but I just want you to read it. So I've spoken before about the hypodermic needle, and you know, it doesn't really help, but this gives them a lot more detail about why it's ineffective. So I've written it off and I've said to you that it's old hat, and it, you know, it doesn't take account for audiences having their own brains, but this goes into a bit more detail why. So just read through that, but don't feel you don't need to make any notes on it. So go into a lot more about identity and especially gender. So make sure that you're making these notes, all right? So we've looked at a bit of Laura Mulvey before, but it goes on to develop it further, okay? So just make sure you read that. And then the summary is quite good, okay? So just be aware that, you know, you have to remember this. Adorno is mass media has power. Fiske is resistance, all right? Because there'll be two key theorists that you'll need for your exam, okay? And I'll be testing you on that throughout the year anyway, but just make sure that you're happy with the key points for each theorist.